last time you felt like you bonded with someone? And how did you build on that bond? Despite each individual having a different response, I'm sure that in one way or another, trust came to mind. Trust is widely acknowledged as a key factor to long-lasting relationships. And today, I would like to introduce deep trust. Deep trust is derived from the Chinese word 信任, a trust concept built on emotional ties. 信任 is made of two characters, 信 meaning faith, and 任 meaning responsibility. It stems from Confucian philosophy of 五论. You may have heard of this as the 5 cardinal relationships. These have had a significant impact on how relationships are formed in Chinese society. 信任 is applicable to all spheres of life, and it's driven by mutuality, sincerity, and reciprocation. 信任 emphasizes the heart over rational thought. Now you may ask yourself, how come I, a 17-year-old German student, am standing here talking to you about this Chinese phenomena? Well, I grew up in Shanghai, and I believe that because of this, 信任 was something quite natural, which I subconsciously implemented into my own life. Growing up, I always found it incredibly easy to build relationships with those around me, whether it be our neighbors, restaurant staff, or workers at the grocery store I always go to. Growing up this way allowed me to understand and differentiate between Chinese and Western notions of trust. I recently read Geography of Thought by Richard Nisbett. You may have heard of this. It explores these different systems of thought. He describes Westerners as having a strong interest in categorization, which helps them to know which rules apply to the objects in question. And in my readings, rules repetitively appeared as a key driver for building trust in the West. I've demonstrated this using a mountain. The person climbing the mountain is taking a very linear approach. They're headed towards the peak, and to get there, they're trusting the different checkpoints on the way. And these checkpoints from 1 to 3 represent the different rules to follow. However, unlike this Western approach of trust, in China, trust is based on emotional bonding in relationships. I read an interesting interpretation of this in a research paper carried out by Kritz and Keating, where they write about demonstrating 信任 using a tree. I took this written description and I turned it into my own image. The tree of trust. The roots are composed of ties with family, and the thick stems are the bonds which are formed through 信任. Now what's not shown here are the slightly more fragile branches, those that break off once in a while, just like slightly more shallow relationships do. The heart at the center of the tree is the pathway to the thick stems, as whilst you as an outsider will not become equivalent to family, by building trust with the person and emotionally bonding with them, your relationship can turn into one of those thick stems. I'd like to share an experience in my life where conflict occurred as a result of tension between these two systems of trust. I've always actively participated in Model United Nations, where we simulate the UN. In one committee, there were 4 of us appointed as chairman, with 1 student leading as president. The president had grown up in Europe and the rest of us in Asia. And at the start of the conference, when assigning the different tasks to each of us, our president was very keen on writing down certain rules. Why? To ensure good cooperation. However, the rest of us disagreed, arguing that instead we should use the time to get to know each other better, trusting one another that each of us will complete these tasks at a high level consistently solely by promising to cooperate. It was clear that the 2 of them had a very different idea of the foundation of trust building, rules versus relationships. Understanding both sides, I naturally took on the role of a bridge and mediated between the 2 of them. We ended up deciding to each try out the different tasks, and trust was built in the process without following any rules. I believe that through this reciprocated trust and mutual agreement of keeping our promises, the MUN conference ended up being a huge success. It also led to us keeping in touch to this day, 2 years later. So why is it so important to understand and acknowledge 信任? It reduces uncertainty and it sustains relationships in the long run. And I'd like to end by sharing how each of us can incorporate 信任 into our own lives, which is by focusing on one thing only: being sincere. You don't have to know someone well to pay attention to them and to keep your promises. Therefore, I hope that once you walk out today, You keep the idea of sincerity in mind when you meet the next person, and you use your heart to connect with them. Thank you.